Today we have a very special Exclusively Games interview because the lovely faces joining me on screen now belong to Apocalypse Studios. And if you guys would just go ahead and introduce yourselves.
I will go first, I guess. Hi, everyone. My name's Denis Dyack. I am the CEO and founder of Apocalypse Studios.
I'm Ian Stenhouse. I am the associate producer at Apocalypse.
And I'm Phil Hames, Chief Operating Officer at Apocalypse.
Okay, and the reason why it's a very special interview also is because we're here to talk about a game called Deadhaus Sonata. And for those who don't know, this is an action RPG where you play as the dead, the undead, fighting against the living. And that is right up my alley. I am pumped for a game like that. And especially pumped because, again, some people will recognize one of the names there. Denis Dyack has worked on previous titles such as Legacy of Kain, Blood Omen, and Eternal Darkness. So we've got just a really appropriately wicked energy going into this game about playing the undead, fighting the living, and I could not be more excited. So the first question that I think will immediately come to people's minds if they don't know anything about the game and they just hear that, they hear the undead fighting against the living, they immediately think, oh, what kind of undead? What kind of undead can you be and fight against the living? So if you guys want to break that down for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Should I take this one, Ian?
Sure.
And Phil?
Because it's in lieu of the traditional RPG class system where you pick fighter, mage, thief, you have types of undead. And what are those types?
Right. So we are starting with, and this is, we're starting with 7 classes, but there's also different groups within those classes as well. But let me talk about the classes first. So the classes are Vampire, Revenant, Banshee, Lich, Wraith, Wight, and Ghoul. And we're using something called a tri-archetype system. Those familiar with Eternal Darkness will see the similarities where you have a material plane where the Revenant is most familiar with. You'll have sort of the magical where the Lich is related. And then you'll have the essential, the soul, where the Wight is related to, and that's got a lot to do with artifacts. And if you look at that trinary system, you'll see how all of those different classes relate to the game itself. And on top of that, we also have different classifications of undead. So to become undead, we basically have 4 ways that you can become undead. One is returned, composed, burdened, and risen. These different ways of coming back from the undead create different cultural things within Deadhaus itself and the political makeup of Deadhaus. So not only do we have the classes, but we basically have the various different political factions as well, and the way that the I guess what you would call subspecies within the undead. So that's sort of at a 10-foot level what's going on there.
And that kind of jumps ahead a little bit for some of the questions because being an RPG and ARPG, it's a story-driven narrative is very important, and it's obviously anyone who remembers Legacy of Kain, Blood Omen, or Eternal Darkness, we know that it's going to be a very layered and interwoven narrative. But just to start with, you named the 7 classes, so you get to play as let's just go through them because it's the undead. They're awesome. So vampire, everyone knows vampire. There's nobody who doesn't know what a vampire is. And the way that it plays so far in your game, from what I've seen, is he's very agile, really, really fast. He's just darting around and just laying into things with these quick weapons. And he's I've seen some abilities where he can draw the blood out of people at a distance, multiple ones, and hurl fire and things like that. So just let's just talk about him from the starting point.
Sure. So the vampire is what is the most balanced hybrid archetype class of all the classes within Deadhaus. It's literally right in the middle. And he or she, because you can play as a male or female, of course, uses blood magic. So what that means is the vampire will use its own blood that it, obviously takes off of others to cast magical spells as well. So with a vampire, it's always a trade-off between life and casting and physical damage, all those kind of things. So from that perspective, balance and really moving around really quickly, which are traits of vampires, and then of course shapeshifting, where you shapeshift into various different creatures. In the video, we show the werebat. There will be various others where that's the type of gameplay you're going to see from the vampire.
Okay, so that's really cool. So first of all, each of these classes plays differently from each other. The vampire is bound by different rules and has different abilities than the Revenant. Yep. And this one you mentioned was really cool. So to use his power, it takes his life, basically his HP, which is blood, and then he gets really cool. That sounds like high risk, high reward. When you're in the thick of it, and you're like, my HP's kind of low, and these guys are bearing down on me, and this spell would be really helpful, but it's going to bring me that much lower, and that's a really tense play style that's really fun. That I think a lot of people would have a blast with. Transformations, the werebat. People who've never seen it before, there's going to be gameplay cycling during this interview, but everyone knows the old school vampire myths. They turn into bats, and normally they kind of imagine this as a cloud of bats or a single little vampire bat fluttering around. But this thing is enormous, and it's his ultimate ability, right? It's
well, I don't know if I'd say it's an ultimate ability. It's one ability that's going to be very strong. We're very, very early in development, but there's going to be forms that are, I would say, much more devastating than just the werebat. The werebat is sort of a fast melee class. There's going to be like, as an example, Draco Liches, or more towards the magic side of transformation. So when you transform into a Draco Lich, you won't be meleeing so much, but you'll be laying waste to things as you fly around, and it's going to be nasty. So yeah, we've got a lot of different things planned for the vampire that are very, very interesting. And I think the idea is to have very specific customizations where each player can really play the class the way that they want to.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit, obviously with each class, but starting with the vampire. For instance, one of the levels of customization, I assume, is cosmetic. Yes. Is that fair to guess? Okay. And I think that's a good thing starting off with a vampire, because for me, he's too pretty right now. I know he's a placeholder, and it's just to kind of showcase, but he's gorgeous. Is there going to be, or plan to be, presumably, a more Nosferatu-esque appearance, the kind of more twisted, clearly dead-looking thing for vampire, as opposed like different types of aesthetics. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. And yes.
Yes. Okay. Good. Then perfect. That are one of the aesthetic options going to be sparkles?
Hard no.
You know, like Twilight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No Twilight vampires in this one. Okay. So you mentioned obviously various types of customization, cosmetics, just one of them. So example for the vampire would be, more Nosferatu looking, more Shadow of the Vampire. What about combat customization, for example? How would that look like specifically for the vampire?
I'll answer. You guys wait.
Anyone can answer.
Okay. So we've been talking and designing quite a bit of this. So the answer is, as the vampire, you can really head towards what kind of playstyle you want. So if you head more towards the physical combative style, you can. If you want to head more towards the magical style, you also can. Or if you want to move more towards the essential or the shape-shifting, changing your physical appearance in many ways, you can do that as well. So really, again, it's building off this trinary archetype system where players can really choose what direction they want to go in, all based upon the physical, the magical, or the essential.
So it's kind of like a talent tree specialization. Is that how you would liken it to?
Correct.
Okay.
It is absolutely a talent tree. Yeah, there's going to be that aspect of it. We're trying to do some novel things with the talent tree, but by and large, we think that is a staple of action RPGs, skill points, and all of them, as well as sleep points.
I also noticed in some of your early material, weapon loadouts were a form of customization. I think for the vampire, I noticed one of the options was something like a scimitar, and then there was another one where he was wielding two axes, two small hand axes. Tell me about that. How does that? I'm assuming there will be more than two at some point, or
each class will have access to different types of weapons, and each weapon gives the character wielding them specific different types of attacks and move sets and stances.
Okay. And any ideas about what you're looking for in terms of numbers per class? Are you aiming toward we will have at least 3 weapon sets for each class, or?
I think I think we'll probably be hitting much higher than that. I think the way to think about it is this: we're really combining 2 different types of game genres. So if you look at a combo-based game like, say, Bloodborne or Dark Souls, where the weapon that you have certain combos, so combos are going to be based on whatever weapon you have. So whether you're dual wielding axes and you want to spin to win, or you have a scimitar, or you have a spear or something like that, that's where all the combos are going to come in. And then you have that side, and then you combine that with the skill tree, in which you'll be customizing your character to either go more towards the physical, the magical, or the essential. So it's quite dynamic, and it's multi-dimensional in that regard. And so I would say we're looking at least 5+ weapon categories per class. Actually, it doesn't even have to be per class. It would just we'll just do it in the whole game, and then different characters will be I don't even know if we're going to limit it at this point, but there'll be various different types of weapons that you'll be able to use, from like 2-handed swords to crossbows or whatever it's going to be.
So so the Revenant could also wield one of the weapons that the vampire was wielding.
Yes.
Okay. And so the way the customization breaks down, a dual axe wielding magic specialized vampire would still be a different gameplay experience than a dual axe wielding physical specialized vampire, and also a different experience from a scimitar wielding magic specialized. So it just breaks down in all these different kind of components.
Yes.
But aside from all that, the myriad customizations we have, just the base classes, the base undead archetypes themselves are very different from one another. And that has me just pumped, because asymmetrical gameplay, it's so compelling to me. It always has been. I've seen little bits and pieces where I've noticed tiny little differences, in the trailer, for instance. So let's move on to the Revenant. So one of the differences I noticed in him, and for people who don't know, because everyone will know what a vampire is. Some people won't know what a Revenant is. So what is a Revenant?
So a Revenant is an undead that was risen from hatred. Something happened to it in its former life that has brought it back for revenge or something. And in Deadhaus Sonata, the Revenant's going to be focused on its rage. And it's going to get more and more angry as the battle progresses. And we've developed and designed the Revenant's mechanics to be fitted to rage and the buildup of that emotion.
Okay, so whereas the vampire has to pay his own life for power and feed life, the Revenant has to. It's almost momentum based, maybe you could call it, where it's combat itself. Like build up that acceleration through combat to get that rage meter up, and use that as your power. Where you might, like, a Revenant might suffer in a way a vampire wouldn't from a lull in combat because he has no rage. Whereas if,
Right.
so that's interesting. That was the so I noticed, the top of the UI we've got the little life bar, and then under that we had a red bar for the vampire, which is his blood reservoir. I noticed it was, and I'm assuming it's all placeholder for now. The Revenant's was gray, and that was to indicate rage for now. So yeah, he looks like a heavy hitter. He looks like a slugger, like a big two-handed, and medieval plate armor and things like that. Let's talk about his powers. What can he do?
Well, the Revenant is always trying to satiate his anger at all times. And he will do things that physically punish people for their transgressions at all times. So, as an example, where the vampire is going to be trading blood for life, the Revenant is just going in and doing damage. He is just breaking stuff all the time. And one of his special moves that we have right now, again, it's all the artwork, all the artwork that you're seeing right now. We're in a prototype stage, and we should have been maybe even more explicit that the things a lot of prototypes, there's not even textures in the game. So this is all very new stuff, and it looks so different already. But anyway, one of his special abilities is to uppercut someone and have them go about 200 to 300 meters in the air, or 2 to 300 feet in the air, and then slam them into the ground, causing complete, as well as him or her.
You skipped a step.
Oh, punch!
If you uppercut someone in 300 feet in the air, then you got to fly up to them.
Oh yeah, you fly up to them. You punch. What the actual move is? He punches someone about 5 or 6 times right in the face. He basically sheathes the sword and he's just wailing away, and then he uppercuts, takes him up to the sky, and then just body slams him down. And it was quite fun to do that move. But that's the spirit of where we're going to be taking the Revenant. The Revenant is going to be a Punisher. He is going to essentially represent rage in every way we can, and all his mechanics and the way that he plays is completely. I wouldn't call it the polar opposite, because they're all so different, but he is very, very different than how the vampire plays. But he is definitely a tankier class, where the vampire is more quick risk reward.
So when you say tankier, you mean basically he has more HP. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just to delay being fun as it is. I think this could be interrupting all the punching and uppercuts, which are great things. I think this is a great time as well. We probably should level set with the people listening to this and watching it exactly where Deadhaus is in development, what we've shown so far, and why we've shown those things, right? Because I think we're kind of at this early stage where a lot of the questions that are being answered may sound a little uncertain or in progress. And that's because this is really early, and we did intend to launch this, this early trailer as soon in the process as we did. So really what this is something that you would see in the industry very frequently behind closed doors when you're pitching to publishers or doing internal demos. And this is where you really craft out, does the concept work? Does it feel right? As Denis mentioned, it's kind of lucky to have textures usually in this scenario. And why we're doing that is we want to create a journey from like the earliest stages we could for the community and gamers out there to understand what we're building and follow us along as we build it. Something that we've been passionate about for quite a few years now is kind of opening up that process of design and letting people kind of get through the opaqueness that is usually around in the industry but also to become involved in the world that we're building and the story that we're crafting. And as we've mentioned, community is a huge piece of what we're doing. And you think of like community-driven design, Denis has referenced that already in this conversation. And it's like the earlier you can get people interacting and seeing it, the better. I think we didn't probably do the best job we could have in communicating what we were showing, but it really was our first concept at gameplay to see how this thing feels, how the combat will interact, and we will replace pretty much everything that's seen in that demo. But it was really to get something out to show that, hey, this is being worked on. We're interested in you guys being interested in it. We love feedback and we love interacting with you, to the point where we've even got Discord channels and stuff where, if you want to get involved, you can reach out through Facebook or Discord and our own forums and really find out a lot more about this. So that's kind of the plan here, is just to release content fairly frequently over time throughout the whole stage of development, and so people can really understand what we're doing and how games come together behind the scenes a little more and be involved in that process.
Even just in concept, being a vampire and killing the living and paying for your magic with your own blood, and being something so angry it came back from the dead and flying people into the air, still awesome.
We are trying to be as transparent as possible, and having this is very different than anything else we've ever done before as far as game development goes, and it is a little scary. So as an example, most games get shown usually no sooner than 6 months before they release, and they'll talk about alphas and betas, but they're not really what we would consider an alpha or a beta. It's more a marketing alpha and beta. Alphas and betas can take the time between alpha and beta is usually around half a year at least, and so we're looking at this as we're going to show this, and the feedback that we get, the sooner we get feedback, positive or negative, the faster the game is able to iterate, and we want to iterate with the community. And we've already gotten some really good hardcore feedback just in our forums or on the Discord of where we want to take some of the stuff, and it's been extremely helpful already. And I think that we really want to empower gamers. We feel we work for gamers, and this is one of the best ways we can do it. And the game is very early. It's going to be running on all the next gen systems, so it doesn't look pretty yet. It's not going to. It's not meant to. It's meant to just be a proof of concept, essentially. And that's really what we were doing there. So.
Yeah, I mean, the concept is cool, and we're here to talk about that concept. And speaking of which, you mentioned one of the concepts as we were talking about the Revenant. Can he fly?
Revenant?
Yeah, because he flies up to grab someone, so he has some limited flight capability?
So I guess the first question is, are we going to have... are we going to put in basically height mechanics for combat?
That was the next question.
Yeah, so I think the answer to that is yes. So one of the things that was not done at the time of the prototype was the werebat, who obviously has wings, was not flying. That one will fly. So will there be flight in the game? Yes. The Revenant itself, as we continue to spec it out, may have some aerial combat, but that is still TBD.
Okay. Is there anything like a visual like I noticed he's kind of engulfed in ectoplasm, kind of this purple fire. Are there visual indicators of his rage building, like that builds, into a big, when his rage is low, it's a low kindle. When he's really enraged, it's kind of a pyre.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of visual indications of anger, and none of that is implemented yet. But to show the amount of rage, Revenant, by definition, is very angry, and we're really going to do all we can to really make that apparent to the gamer, and to not only make it, clear, but to make it fun.
I like that he grabs people and punches them, even though he has a giant weapon, because he's like, no, that's too fast. And I'm just too pissed off. I've got to use my hands. Another one of the classes you mentioned was Banshee. I want to believe everyone knows what a Banshee is, but I love the undead, so I can't assume that. So for the people that don't know, what is a Banshee?
Okay, I will take it. A Banshee is basically a spirit of a mourning woman who wails, and whenever you hear a Banshee wail, it is a foretelling that someone is going to die. So it is a very dangerous spirit or undead that will essentially kill you very very viscerally, and her primary modus operandi is generating fear. So she will generate, or the Banshee, I'll just say the Banshee will generate fear in the class, and as you build up fear amongst the people that you're fighting, it will become more and more devastating for the enemies as you do that.
Okay, so you're talking about like damage over time effects, kind of? Is that her style?
Style is very quick combat status effects that generate fear in an area. Doing things like really quickly moving, attacking people from behind, and then using her Banshee wail to do incredibly devastating things is how the Banshee operates. Without actually, showing the gameplay, it is very different than both the Revenant, which is a sort of heavy hitter, goes right in brute force. The Banshee is more sophisticated and uses a lot of status effects to generate fear, where the Revenant will say go in and tank, where the vampire will go in and finesse and balance everything. The Banshee will just go around creating a ominous atmosphere where people just want to get out, and it just terrorizing the battlefield.
Yeah. She's a battlefield controller is her role.
Yeah. Yes.
I noticed you said the Banshee. You made that designation. Now I have read. It's from Irish folklore, and I have read there are very rare tales of male banshees. Is this class type gender locked, or are there also male banshees?
There are male banshees.
There are.
Okay. A question that I actually didn't get into in the Revenant one applies to this one as well. You mentioned tankiness, so I'm assuming some classes are they have more HP is how it works, or more effective HP because of either their natural mitigation or just a big HP pool. Basically, they can take more punishment.
Correct.
That's true. Okay, so Revenant is probably at the top, I'm assuming.
For hit points, yes,
he's the biggest boy.
In general, I think that's a good general, but there are exceptions, and he won't be the only tank. There are ways to make some of the other classes tanky, but they will be different.
Such as transformations of the vampire.
Or the Ghoul as a good example.
Really, I would. Well, let's wait for him. I'm really excited about him.
All right.
The Banshee, I was wondering about her tankiness. How do you? What are your thoughts in terms of the fact that she's incorporeal? I mean, does that mean tiny HP pool? Does it mean physical attacks are less effective against her?
So the Banshee, we don't have her as incorporeal. She is, I think, pretty much physical. That's not necessarily true. But let me explain how non-corporeal is going to be in our game. Non-corporeal is essentially going to be implemented in a very traditional way, where ordinary weapons, very difficult to score a hit, extremely difficult. Maybe it's possible, but it's extremely rare. Magical weapons, however, will have definite effects on. So in some cases, if you're against a group of soldiers and there's no magical support, If you're going to be non-corporeal or ethereal, you're just going to they have no hope essentially of beating you. But many of the classes will be able to go into this non-corporeal form, but it's going to be a selection in a definite direction that you will want to go in as you evolve that class. So it's not all of them, but some of them for sure.
So,
like the Wraith is another good example.
It's super cool. I'm assuming maybe the vampire can become Mist, and that would be his iteration of Incorporeal. It's interesting. You said he's right in the middle, and I can kind of see he can start to play with other roles through his shape-shifting. Become tankier if he needs to through shape-shifting, or become incorporeal. But that's so cool that you can be... I can't even think of a game where you can actually be incorporeal. Like you're a ghost. Like every RPG I've ever played and you're a ghost, it's like attack with a sword, 5 HP minus. And it's like, no, it's a ghost. It should go through him. So that's really cool that you can actually be incorporeal. You've mentioned 2 other classes. God, which one do I want to hear about first? It's got to be the Ghoul. The Ghoul is so exciting to me because every other class we've named so far, even if somebody maybe hasn't heard exactly what a Revenant is or a Banshee, they're kind of, they're more familiar. Like, okay, a ghost that spreads fear, and at least as a protagonist type role, you can imagine a vampire, of course, but a Ghoul, he's they're normally seen as kind of the fodder of the RPG world. They show up in droves and just get clobbered down, but now you can actually play as one, and you got to tell me all about it. Tell me about this Ghoul.
So the Ghoul, in folklore, ghouls are demons or undead that roam graveyards and feast on the corpses. And the Ghoul in Deadhaus Sonata is that you are what you eat. His main focus is gore and eating different body parts of enemies to gain different buffs and abilities and other attributes that really affect how his gameplay works. I find the Ghoul very interesting.
How do I visualize that? Like he just jumps up and gnaws someone's arm off and he gets a buff?
Well, yes, in a sense. So think about it this way. He's a very visceral, brutish, combative that eats what he kills. And by eating different body parts, hearts, as an example, will give you more hit points. Eating someone's brain will allow you to, read their minds from a contextual story point of view, but also give you more magic power. And so you literally, as you gorge yourself and become bigger and heavier, you will get more and more power. So you are literally feasting in this visceral, macabre of dead bodies. It's just gore. What can you eat? And that will determine what you eat determines how you play.
Do you get fat?
The idea. Yes.
That's awesome. That's so cool. But they have to be dead. That's the rule. You have to kill them and then to eat them.
Not necessarily.
You can kill them by eating them.
Okay. So eat their face off while they're okay. How? So you said
I don't know
brutish,
if I've seen
so
the latest version of this, but is he?
Not released. No one's seen anything.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say I don't know if I've seen the latest version. Are we still going with moving on all fours with this guy? I think we are, right? Yeah.
Correct.
So he's going to move differently than the others too, which I think is cool.
Yeah. Are there any kind of are there things you wouldn't want to eat? So as indiscriminate as your palate might be as a Ghoul, you still have to kind of keep an eye out and be like, I don't eat that, or I might get a bad effect, or yeah.
Yes.
What about environmental tasties? Like you're clambering around and there just happens to be a graveyard. So, I'll just dig that up beneath that body. Or there's a pile of bodies here maybe that are being thrown away because they're plagued. So I munch on one and now my claws are poisoned. Or is it only enemies, or are there just ways to find bodies and munch on them?
Well, I think I think the way to really give a system for that, in the way that we're going to be doing it is, the fresher the corpse, the more valuable it is. So, as an example, bodies are bodies. Really, what's an enemy to a ghoul?
Yeah.
And but if something's been dead for 1,000 years, it's not going to be as tasty as someone who's newly viscerated. So there's essentially a decay value. So if you come across a battlefield that's, say, a week old, it will give you substance, but not as good as like going into battle and going to Dairy Queen or something like that.
Yeah, the Dairy Queen is the freshly dead body.
Correct.
What about that makes me think of the vampire. Presumably, I'm assuming you're going with certain lore here that he can't drink dead blood.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Is there an option to, and it'll hurt you, or you just cannot do it?
You can. It's very bad.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So you have to be a little bit careful, maybe.
Yes. You don't want to drink dead blood. That will do direct damage to you.
Awesome. What would you say? So what will the ghoul's role? I mean, Revenant you've likened to a tank, a bruiser. Banshee's battlefield controller. Vampires versatile, really. I guess Ghoul would be. What would you sum up his role as?
Chef.
That's perfect. No, nobody say anything else. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, then the other one was the Wraith, and you can actually be an incorporeal Wraith and have swords go through you and laughing. I think people know what a Wraith is. Basically a kind of a ghost, right?
Yep.
It's a cooler word for you. Ghost wouldn't sound as cool, but Wraith has a certain gravitas.
Yeah, a Wraith is a more compared to a ghost, is more within a noble or warrior caste background, I would say. And
this is like church for me.
Yeah, and our Wraiths are what's the right word? Into torture, I think is the right.
Yeah.
So they will be causing lots of pain, I think is. But Ian, why don't you jump in? You're ready to jump in.
Yeah. So the Wraith, as we mentioned, her big thing is the being ethereal, and that involves things like being harder to hit with physical weapons and avoiding some collision types. But she has a very big focus on tethering enemies together in different ways, and then applying a lot of status effects and torture to them, and increasing her abilities through that.
Yeah, a lot of torment. And
so dots.
No, so very much where the Banshee is definitely crowd control, but more of a very dexterous, moving very quickly through the field. The Wraith is something more akin to a torturous spirit that's can move fast, but really is going to create a lot of torment in an area. It's more of an area effect support class that does really debilitating tethering, chains, very much Hellraiser-like, doing things to various different enemies that you really support the team and your group in many different ways. So
this is one of the ones I haven't seen no of, and I understand all the art assets are placeholders right now, but I think they give you a kind of a general idea of the direction you wanted to go. I've seen nothing for the Wraith. What's he gonna look like?
Well, I guess we'll be releasing these things our site right now. So on the site right now, we show a vampire, we show a revenant, and we show a lich, which we haven't talked about yet.
We will.
Okay, cool. And we haven't shown the ghoul yet that Phil was talking about, and we'll be rolling all of these out as we go. And the idea is we want as much community. So we're rolling them out as soon as possible. We want as much community feedback as possible, and the idea is just to get them out, get the ideas out there, start iterating, and that'll make the game the best it can be. And I think we should be able to just show you early concepts of the ghoul as we're speaking here now, so people can see it for the first time. Give you guys an exclusive, so we can do that.
Okay, yeah.
Regarding the visuals of the Wraith, that will be released when we are ready to release it, but we are very excited about the aesthetic and the appearance of the Wraith so far.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell me if I'm cold or warm, of course, just from cultural influences and things I've read about. I just imagine the dark hood, the shadowy, a being shadow-like.
A little bit of that mixed in with a little bit of Hellraiser is the way I would describe it.
Pinhead?
No, Pinhead is very specific. I would say more torturous, more visceral. Lots of chains. Okay. Lots of.
Oh yeah, chains.
Yeah, that's when we were talking about tethering. It's going to be. It's going to be a very different type of. Not atypical, but definitely consistent with the lore of the Wraith. But it's going to be. So go ahead.
I was saying there's a lot of symbolism there with chains and torment and being bound to existence, unable to break free even through death, and cool stuff. All right, you mentioned Lich. Let's talk about Lich. I love Liches. For people that don't know, this is generally, and you correct me if I'm wrong, as far as most lore of undead goes anywhere, this is always one of the top undead entities. It would be one of the first things that comes to mind when you think who's in charge of all these zombies. I think it's an old English word that means corpse, lich. So little and they're basically really, really powerful undead spellcasters. That they were spellcasters in life, and through the pursuit of immortality, they performed rituals, and they are liches. Is that about how it's going to work in Deadhaus?
Yes, with a little bit more specificity, I would say on that. So liches and prior to becoming liches, use various different types of death magic that slowly destroy their own bodies. And the more magic that they cast, the more that their bodies are destroyed, to the point where eventually they're going to die. Of course, the smartest wizards or most brilliant ones figure a way to cheat death, essentially, and become undead. And but the way to describe these casters is they use substance to fuel their casting. That's going to be body destroying. So they need vessels to cast their magic, and if they don't have them, then they're self-destructing again. So they want to go out and get vessels where they can use various vessels to cast their magic until they're all used up, and then they move on to get another vessel.
That is so much more fun than a mana bar. So Nuker, direct damage, that's the style of his magic?
There will be various different styles, just like there's different styles of casters. With each, the way that we're trying to make this asymmetrical is we're really looking at each of the different classes, and we're saying it's going to have a different specific mechanic, and a different specific feel to it. So as you play the game, it does feel like you're playing an entirely different system as you play this class. So as a caster, yes, you can definitely be a nuker. You can definitely be, a support character using various buffs. All that's very typical of casters. But what we're looking at is, well, how do we make a caster different? Because using a mana pool, you can go play any game and do that. The idea with Deadhaus is we want to really try to do some things that are very interesting for gamers. And when you look at the lore from a Lich, that's very consistent with that, and that's the direction we're going with all of these. Frankly, all of these different classes. And the interesting thing is, we did a tally as we were, very early on in development. I think don't we have a list of over 150 different types of undead or something like that? There's crazy amounts. Yeah, there's lots and lots of undead. So, and from all different cultures. And right now, as we're our first set, we're keeping it kind of gothic. But that can change as the future rolls. So anyway.
Phylacteries? Any going to be any of that for liches?
Yes.
Like your soul is bound to your phylactery, and
so I guess that gets into the whole mechanic for death for us, and that we have a very specific death mechanic. And what I mean, what to be clear with that, you're already dead. So what does it mean if you're playing the undead and you're already dead? How do you die? We have various different stages of death, and where the most fluent and intelligent adversaries will know that they have to exorcise your spirit from certain entities to really do the job, or eventually you're just going to come back. There's no death as in, so we do definitely have hit points. We're not going to try to reinvent the wheel on absolutely everything, but there's going to be various stages where you're already dead, and the different stages that you can transmute to, or I guess your persistence will actually change, where you have phylacteries and you have various different other means of levels of incapacity is the way I would describe it. But you're already dead.
That's let's deviate on that. So a bunch of peasants surround you and beat you down with pitchforks. You're a lich. Obviously, that's just a setback. Presumably, your soul returns to your phylactery. You respawn or something like that. What if some holy knight exorcises your soul? There's a different penalty. I'm assuming it's not just your character's deleted.
So of course we're going to have some hardcore modes where if that happens, your character truly is deleted, for those who want to play like the hardest of the hardcore. But doing an exorcism and doing exorcism rites are going to take time, and that would mean that your team, that your group that you're with, is also incapacitated or very busy. So there are and then of course it's going to require that the actual entity knows where to look. So there's all kinds of different various levels that we'll be doing on that. We want to make the risk of oblivion very different than it would be in a normal game where you just, because we're alive right now, we're trying to put you in the perspective of already being returned from the dead.
Yeah. That's another thing that is just music to my ears, because so many games where the undead are involved, it just means what? Here's some examples. Poison heals them and potions hurt them, or like a Phoenix down is an instant kill, or but it's just, I don't know. They just don't feel undead. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's really good to hear that.
We'll be
here's a question. If you die, let's say you're a vampire and you get struck down and your body falls down, can your ghoul ally eat you?
A question we have not entertained per se, but I would say yes. And the way that I guess the way that we have the game built, that won't matter to you because of the various ways that you can come back, you won't care.
He'll get a unique buff.
Sure.
That's so cool.
And the death system that we certainly need to roll out to the community is very, very different. And but you're dead. So it's not going to be what you see in a typical game. You're not going to run around as a ghost and look for your body and whatever.
Right.
We'll be looking into. We have done a ton of research into occult literature to make sure that we're very consistent of what it means to remove evil spirits and exorcise different entities from hauntings and undead, which are, as you probably well aware, that's a very deep amount of lore and literature, and that's how we're basing this whole system off of. Yeah.
Barriers of salt where you can't pass, things like that.
Absolutely. Salt is a big deal. Salt, lead.
Yeah.
Silver.
Yeah.
Silver is another big one. Yeah.
I just, it's just like candy to me, just personally. Just the undead have always been so compelling. I don't know why. I mean, what I'm assuming it must be I know it is for you, Denis, but I'm assuming for all of you, there must be some. I mean, you're here working on there, so there must be some passion for the undead.
Very much so. I've always been a big horror fan, both in movies and in video games. But the lore and the worlds that have been influenced by mythology and folklore of the undead is just such a compelling amount of content that I've always found so fascinating. And actually working on this has been like amazing because of that.
It's one that I always feel really drawn to and so often disappointed by, because people want the spectacle of the undead, but they don't want to put the work in, like you said, doing that research on the lore and salt and what does it really mean and how would you behave differently if you really were. And it's just, it doesn't capture the imagination. It's just they're there to just be a monster mask.
Well, Phil and I have talked about this actually quite a bit, and Phil, I want you to jump in here. But the way to think about Deadhaus Sonata is this: if I guess it's almost 20 years ago now with Legacy of Kain, 20 plus years, and if I was to create a game like Legacy of Kain in its spirit, this is how we're going back to our roots. I would research the lore a lot, but I would really study the medium. The medium today is multiplayer. A lot of people are watching on Twitch, so how can we incorporate that into the game, give players agency over Twitch, but tell stories in this environment and build a world where all of this makes sense. One of the, I think, key factors in both Eternal Darkness and in Legacy of Kain, they were fantasies, but we were very consistent on what we did with the research and literature, and all of his spells fell into a very consistent. So when we're talking about all the different things with blood, as an example, we did that in Legacy of Kain. So if you drank dead blood, it was bad. It would just directly hurt you. If you, like, we had different types of blood that would definitely damage Kain, and you would have to be careful that some armors that automatically sucked in blood. It was great if you're around humans, but if you're around creatures that were dead, it was very bad for you. It would be almost instant death. So, but what we're really doing with Deadhaus Sonata is saying, let's take a genre, say something like Legacy of Kain, make it multiplayer, make it complete, keep it narrative based, and let's do something for today's gamer. That's really what we're trying to do with Deadhaus Sonata.
I would jump in, absolutely. So, as Denis mentioned, we spent a long time with a lot of these concepts, many years really, with various different ideas and game designs that we were going through. And this is something that really jumped out at me on seeing the first initial kind of pitch draft. The first things that really took my mind when I read the doc like the couple of pages that we had, was it took the things that were great about all the other ideas we had, but then it also put a twist on it that was a little bit Legacy of Kain, a little bit Too Human, a little bit Eternal Darkness, and like the raw elements of those things, and modernized them for the medium, as Denis said. You know, we experimented a whole bunch with the integration of different mediums, with the idea of TV shows and film running alongside video games, and ultimately that would have proven a little further ahead of where we were as an industry to really develop out and make work. But the concept was there. But this thing came up, and this document really had a core to it that was like super powerful with what we can do with technology that's emerging and present right now. And I think when Denis talks about the medium, when you talk about Twitch and other things like that, and you see that really where are video games right now, where are people interacting and how are people playing, it's changed from 5 years ago and 10 years ago, and it's going to continue to do that in this idea of, and I think, Denis, you described this before very well as the old Greek theater, where the audience have participation and could do the thumbs up and the thumbs down, and it would dictate somewhat how things would play out and the actors would respond. And that's kind of where we're going with Deadhaus Sonata, but still wrapping it up in a huge amount of story. And then the question becomes, how do you do story whilst maintaining those things? And I think we've got some pretty interesting solutions for doing that. But the medium is what's really important right now, and that's what's evolving. And if you look at certainly the recent E3, where you see there's a lot of streaming stuff happening, there's a lot more interaction between people and people playing. So the watching and playing interaction is really, that dynamic is becoming, thousands and thousands of people watching, one person playing. How do you then encapsulate that into an entertainment experience, get them involved to the point where people are actually having an impact on what they're watching, and the player doesn't really know what's coming next either? So I think those are kind of the elements. If you take all these core things that you loved about some of those prior games and smash them up against this new medium and think about what could be possible, I think that's where Deadhaus will shine. And for me, I'm really looking forward to that first time we can get test groups down and really start showing some of those ideas and seeing how players really respond when they don't know what's going to come next, and we got a bunch of people interacting with them. So fascinating thing to be doing, and very, very interesting to see as a medium as how this will evolve going forward too.
And
all those reasons are for sure why Deadhaus is going to shine, but also because you can be a ghoul and your buddy dies and you eat him. That's also why Deadhaus is going to shine.
So, well, that just, that's a natural extension of the way the system is. To be frankly, transparent, when you said that, I hadn't personally thought about that, but it's like, it won't matter, it will still work. With that though, too, just to be totally clear, the company's built from the ground up to do all these things, and even looking at the engine, we're using the Lumberyard engine. The interesting thing about the Lumberyard engine is that's all running on the cloud. It's modular. It's a AAA engine. It's doing some things that other engines literally, in my opinion, don't enable others to do. And there's right now, I expect Lumberyard to be dominant in the future. Right now, it's still very new. It's still in beta. But we're finding it incredible in the way it's changing the way we're considering doing things. It's like we have this huge menu of options and how to do things, and we're doing some very different things already. So as an example, I don't think we've ever talked about this in public. I don't think we have. All of the things that you've seen so far are completely procedurally generated. So when the characters are running around in the video, that's all procedural. So it gets generated on the fly. So we can make a level be 5 minutes. We can make it be 5 hours. We can ramp the difficulty. And there are various things that are really coming together with some of the things we're doing that are aligned with the AWS stack. And then at the same time, some of the tools, as an example, we just got 1.19, which is the latest version of the Lumberyard. It dropped a couple days ago. And they have procedurally generated terrain, which we're already doing procedural generation stuff. So now we're going to stack that on top of our procedural generation for yet another layer of differentiation and complete, I would say, natural differentiation every time you play the game.
Yes, and we've talked a little bit about this before, and people are going to hear that and wonder about the procedural generation. As it was explained to me, a rough estimate is that about half, there's handcrafted as well, especially in hubs and central areas, and then stretches of terrain between can be procedurally generated. Mm-hmm. Now, I think, let's see, did we get all the... we're missing one, at least one of the classes.
The Wight.
That's right. So that's the one nobody's going to know what that is. Even I'm murky. I know obviously it's undead. Let's break down the lore of a Wight. And it's Wight. Yeah. Correct. I know at least that.
That's correct. A Wight is generally classified as a martial undead, I think is a way to describe it. So it is a military undead. So previously a soldier. We have categorized the Wight, and it's very hard to get definitions even if you look on the internet of what a Wight is.
Yes.
We have classified the Wight as in the essential or the spiritual realm, and he or she or it will have the most power in the area of the soul or sentient weapons or artifacts. So he will control various sentient haunted entities to battle alongside with him in a way that is merged with the sentient weapons are him, or her, or its, and the character construction and the way you put it together will be how you customize the amount of sentient weapons that you're using, or artifacts. They don't have to be weapons in the game.
So it's a symbiotic spiritual relationship. If you think of them as two different organisms, they become one organism. When you say essential, am I understanding that correctly? It means as relating to essence?
Yep.
Is that what that means? Okay.
That is correct.
Okay. And so anyone can wield a living weapon, but this particular class is specialized for it, or he's the only one that can wield them?
It has the most affinity towards sentient artifacts and weapons.
Okay.
It's its specialty, and it defines it. That is the definition of what a Wight is.
Yeah.
In our world.
So I think that was all the classes. Is that correct? We got them all?
You did.
Okay. I didn't hear, is Summoner an archetype that's gonna?
A sub-archetype.
Okay, of Lich?
Of various. There will be many undeads have the ability to summon, say, vampire thralls, lich summonings.
Can many undead summon vampire? Is it not only that the vampire is the only one who can summon a vampire thrall?
TBD. To be thought about.
Okay.
I think there certainly are instances in literature that I know of where liches are summoning vampires. Vampires are generally considered within the hierarchy of the undead as the sort of leader class.
Yes.
But they're not exclusively that, and that's going to be part of the story within Deadhaus 2, all the politics, like who are the right people to lead? Are they the most...
I can't tell you, just you saying that, like how much, because I fantasize about the undead a lot, and I've always, what you just said about vampires being a leader class, yeah, I've always thought about that. I've always dreamed of one day writing stories about vampires, books, and I've always thought, I would love to see some interactions between a vampire and a lich, because obviously there's definitely some tension there. As far as and then there are different things like both of them having gazes that subvert the will, and you can just imagine these two undead entities kind of, anyway, all of these undead classes compose what is called the Deadhaus, and that's basically you would look at it like a noble house, a family house almost, even though they're technically from different families. And it's somewhat of an alliance of convenience, I assume, because obviously they are demonized by the living.
Well, the living aren't really toe to toe with the undead. So there's an empire of men, but the empire of men is not even close to the power of Deadhaus. So they could be reviled by the humans, but are the living? They don't really care. It's irrelevant to Deadhaus.
So then the primary antagonist of Deadhaus is not the Empire of Man.
No.
Oh, snap. That's cool. That's interesting. So Deadhaus is composed of different, what would you call the subgroups? Like the vampires, it's the vampire, it's not the vampire house because it's Deadhaus, right?
That's correct.
And then it's not the ghoul house, but it's like, what's the word I'm looking for? Group, the vampire group, the ghoul group.
Races, different races of undead are different classifications. And that's what I mentioned briefly earlier. Is probably very confusing because I said a bunch of stuff. Our species is another way to describe it.
Okay.
So the different races per se are returned, composed, burdened, and risen. And each
composed
one of those
means constructed.
Composed means yes. Composed means created from other things.
So Frankenstein's monster would be composed.
Created from dead beings is what composed is.
Yeah. Okay. And returned would be
returned. Yeah. So fusing of the soul to a dead being. Return is the semi-corporeal being that feed and energize off the living. Burden are created by certain afflictions, are curses. So, say a vampire with the disease of the blood having to feed on blood to survive, the vampires are burdened. And then there's risen that have basically risen on their own accord from sheer will, essentially. And so
a revenant is that?
A revenant is an example of a risen, correct.
So they're allied to each other against some ominous antagonist that is not the Empire of Man. The Empire of Man is more like food, I guess. I assume there's also tension within a Deadhaus. I can't imagine, like, I would have to assume everyone looks down on the ghouls. Or do they? Or...
Well, the real question. So when you start thinking about these things, are who has the right to rule? Who has the right to, or who should rule a certain nation? This is really getting into sort of what I would call political theory. Mm-hmm. And there's often you hear people saying, "What does it mean to be a qualified political candidate?" And I think there's a good argument to be made for anyone who can run for office as a qualified political candidate, because who's going to represent farmers? So I've got, as an example, I've got 2 computer science degrees in neural networks, artificial intelligence, all that kind of stuff, computer science. I also have a phys ed degree, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be a good politician or would run the country well. What is the qualification for that? So maybe when you look at something like a ghoul, why couldn't a ghoul run Deadhaus? Or why couldn't a revenant run Deadhaus? Does it always have to be liches or vampires who are generally lean towards the more intelligent side of things?
But they would think the liches and the vampires would say yes to that, right? That's how they would answer that. Yes, it does have to be us.
Well, I guess the real answer, wouldn't everyone say yes to themselves?
Yes, but I think a lot of so let me see if I'm getting it right. The vampires, for instance, if it's about power, if it's about leadership and power, they would see themselves it would be, you would view them as a whole. Of course, there'd be exceptions, as something of an aristocracy, something of but quite literally the bloodline.
Vampires
and their claim to the throne would be tied into their superiority, basically.
Vampires are very aristocratic,
Yes.
I think, in general, and the whole idea of a ruling class or royalty certainly fit in well with vampires. Now, there's so many, and again, I'm talking specifically about the politics in Deadhaus. What is salt of the earth? When Revenant, and I mean salt of the earth is in the saying, that guy's a good person.
No, well, I was wondering about Revenant because I thought, salt of the earth. Maybe it's just because I love ghouls that I would say ghouls were salt of the earth. Revenant, I assume, would be their claim to the throne would be more military, maybe. Yeah. They wouldn't have the same concern a vampire would have about actually feeding off of the living. They would be a lot more a conquest, and maybe vampires' concerns would seem frivolous to a Revenant.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of instances throughout history and world history where military leaders have become rulers and done a very good job, also a very bad job.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how. So there's all these political factions are going to play a very big role, and the community is going to be able to shape this role substantively within the game. We want to make that a very interesting part of the game. And what does it mean to be risen versus burdened, and all of these things, and what does upper class mean in the undead?
Yeah, super cool. I get so, and I imagine some would be more sympathetic to other groups, like vampires and liches seem like they'd be somewhat sympathetic to each other in terms of intelligence, and liches would be more concerned with forbidden knowledge, but certainly they would be less. Like, I assume there must be a natural sympathy between revenants and wights as a sort of military overlap, to some extent. All really cool. Here's what's going to blow everyone's minds right now. So you've got Deadhaus, and you've got this really a lot of political intrigue and this grappling, this power struggle for ascendancy and leadership, and these ominous unknown threats and all this. And you can play as all these classes, we'll call them. They're basically species within Deadhaus. In the future, there are planned to be other Deadhaus undead, I assume, and new classes that we don't even know about yet. Here's what blew my mind. In the future, there are going to be other houses that aren't even undead.
Correct.
That are going to have a whole different set of species that can be played at. Obviously, down the line, obviously not, but...
Mind-blowing.
One of them is called Xenohouse.
Yes.
Is that right?
That's correct.
And Xenohouse is made up of something like Lovecraftian horrors, right?
The stuff of chaos. Correct. Yes.
And so they are another political force in this world who have completely different agendas than Deadhaus and have conflict with Deadhaus.
Consider them. So we've talked about asymmetry in the sense of the different classes and how they play. Consider a house that's completely asymmetrical to the House of the Undead. And so when you look at Xenohouse as an example, which is one of the ones we've mentioned, its laws of magic, shape-shifting, all the different things that these Xenos are going to do are going to be in no way similar to anything that you see in the Undead.
But throw out some summary lines at me, like summary class archetype for a Xenohouse.
Spoilers.
Yeah, we got to be really careful. Yeah. So we don't want to roll out too much. But the idea is that each house, when we introduce the first house, which is timed approximately about a year after official launch, not early alpha, closed alphas, is that when we introduce PvP, and the PvP will be between the houses. and that will.
Okay. So not PvP within Dead Fighting Dead.
That's correct.
Okay. What about cooperation between houses?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so they can be friends.
They're absolutely asymmetry in how you want to play the game. Both cooperative will always be an option. We didn't want to be too aggressive. We think we're doing a lot of very unique things within Deadhaus already, and so we wanted to take very slow steps on making sure that we have the system balanced before we start introducing PvP. PvP, if done properly, can really have a life of its own, and there's a very skilled player set that is all about PvP and they don't care about PvE. But in order to make that really good, in at least our opinion, is that we want to get the PvE down first, the basic mechanics of all the classes. Know what?
I'm both. I love both equally.
Yeah. I'm glad. Thank you. We're trying.
Give me like a yes or a no as far as let's say Xenohouse class type that has tentacles.
Oh, well, that's a staple of Xeno.
Okay.
Yes.
What about some form of mind control?
That would probably be more akin to another house, like say
something about reducing sanity.
Yes. So.
Snap.
So there's very interesting things when you think about the trinary archetype system. If you replace essence with sanity, you have essentially the system out of Eternal Dark. So now
that's exactly what I was just thinking.
Yeah. So imagine now that each different house has its own trinary archetype, or different system altogether where there's different things. So generally, sanity and those kind of things don't affect the undead at all. But if you're human, sanity does affect you. Or if you're a different race, sanity would make a difference. So there's going to be a house of the mind. There's going to be various houses around all of these different aspects.
A house of the mind? I didn't even know about that one.
Well,
you can't just say that and then just move on. Like what?
Yes, you can.
Sure, we can.
What? I don't know. I don't even know what to imagine with House of the Mind.
Yeah. We've imagined a lot. Our imaginations are very vivid. We're really excited about it. The way that we want to create this game is we want to slowly introduce and roll out concepts. The first thing was, hey, this is what the game is going to be like. So you at least can see it from a gameplay point of view. The graphics need to massively improve. We know that was a rough prototype. It's going to get way better. We're using a AAA engine with an amazing renderer. That there weren't any. Just to be clear, there was no lighting in that level. We just nothing. Literally, there was there's like ambient lighting is all we had running. Ian, is that correct?
If that.
Yeah, it was like we weren't even using the renderer properly whatsoever. Like it was just to show and see the game. And when you see some of the things, and we'll put some footage out there for you to include in this video, but all the lights, say in the Lumberyard Engine as an example, it's all real-time lighting. It's all deferred lighting. So there's no baking of levels or anything like that. It's just, it runs all the time. And when you see the difference in that, it's amazing. The foliage, as an example, huge difference with 1.19, which we're just getting up and running, and Ian is actually putting in new terrain, new trees. You should see it. It's like night and day. It's massive difference. And that's not even including all the geometry that you've seen in this level that we're all throwing out. So with all that stuff, you have to imagine all that on a content level as well. The content is stuff that we talk about all the time, and we have a 10-year plan for this. There's a whole other level to this game, and that's to do with elder gods that are beyond the actual game itself. And that's where there's a lot of overlap with Eternal Darkness. There's entire magic systems, entire hierarchies of elders and the way that the system's put together that will affect the game on a macro and micro level. And rolling out all of these things is pretty complicated, but we're really excited about. We have to do it slowly. And Phil's right. Without, I'm really bad. I'll just start spilling the beans because I get so excited. But
hey, that's by all means.
Well, we've spilled a lot of beans already, and I'm sure before the night is over we'll spill more. But suffice to say, we are really looking forward to rolling this stuff out, and we're really going in the direction and building this thing building Deadhaus Sonata in the way we want to see it built. And then at the same time, we're introducing what we consider pretty novel ideas into the space. And we haven't even really started talking about serious narrative and how we want to pull some of that stuff up. So there's like all of these huge things that we just have to keep rolling out and just sort of get, hopefully, what I would call a grassroots understanding of the game. Phil, is that what you would describe it? And just sort of build people's perceptions.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. I think the other thing as well is, some of this stuff, obviously, it being kind of a 10-year or even who knows more plan is, a lot of this is conceptual too. And I joke about spoilers, but there's an element there of things are going to change over that time too. So I think don't take any of this as like promising that we're going to deliver this particular thing a year after launch. But we've got some pretty huge plans as to how this all fits together and how it evolves over time. And I think the other thing to take into account with this stuff as well, which is kind of unique to what we're doing, I think, is that because there's community involvement, things will change. So that's another factor. But yeah, I mean, definitely, as Denis said, it's kind of multi-dimensional in how this grows over time. And there's different layers to understand over time, which is why we're rolling things out kind of the way we have been. I just can't wait to see some of these things like get revealed properly, because there's some pretty cool stuff already I think we got some ideas probably in the next couple of months that'll come out in some videos that are going to be pretty cool that you wouldn't have thought of. And
no, there's one you said we're going to spill some more beans, so I thought I'd just go ahead and do that. I mentioned Xeno House, but I've also heard of Giga House.
You have.
And if I remember correctly, it is a house of giants.
Correct.
My first question about that is, how are they going to fit through doors that the other players are going to be able to fit through?
Really big doors.
Or they'll just bust through
walls.
But
if they're in the same level.
Then they'll bust through doors. So if you're gonna have an entity that's, say, 400 feet in the air, that's going to give you definitely some very interesting asymmetrical gameplay against.
Are you saying 400 feet
400
tall?
feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus. How are you? I can't even imagine how they're gonna play nicely with the other kids.
Oh, we've got some really cool ideas on how all that's going to work.
What was their combo going to be? Going to pick up the Revenant and just beat things to death with him?
Well, obviously giants are massive compared to other, I would say, human size. Generally, the undead are typically the size of humans, because they're mostly the human race, and there's a whole story behind why that is. But as we all know, you can have undead giants, you can have undead dragons, there's lots of things. So
you want players, you intend in the future at some point for players to be able to play in your levels as a 400-foot giant. Man.
Yeah. Well, it's something really.
You heard
really
it here
big.
first, folks.
Really, really big. So rather than lock down on a number where that was more of an estimate from me, imagine something that's really, really big compared to a regular play.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So 400 feet might be too big. We'll have to see and actually get the correct scale that we want for each type of giant, each class of giant. But yeah, absolutely. They're going to be big.
I bet ghouls' mouths water so hard when they see giants because it's like so much food.
Manja.
So is my
It's like going to an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Yeah. What is it perhaps wrong to think that there is a well, here's what I think about it. First I thought, oh wow, the humans aren't the primary antagonists because I heard the game set up as you're the undead fighting against the living. And it's like, okay, well, so they're not the primary antagonist. So then who is? And then you were talking about the different houses in the politics and rising to leadership. And I thought, well, maybe there is no primary antagonist. Maybe it's a kind of a political intrigue network. And then you mentioned the outer gods. And I thought, that's probably, if there's going to be one, it's probably the outer gods. And if there's political machination going on in this world, they've probably got their tentacles in it somehow, would be my guess.
There's no question about that. And again, when we say fighting the living, it's a natural assumption to assume that the living are humans. But are giants living? Right? And
well, there's got to be some love. The poor humans. So we haven't even talked about them at all. Like they feel like they're just outmatched on every. They have to have something going for them, right?
They're in a really bad place. They're in a bad place.
Yeah.
They're in a bad place. And in Deadhaus Sonata, the world is very bleak, and as people are aware with the type of stories that I personally like to work on, and certainly I think everyone who's part of Apocalypse now, you're not going to necessarily see happiness in some of the things that we're doing. It's as far as we're concerned, we're really we want to generate catharsis and experiences that people remember, but that's not always positive. It can be very difficult to digest, and we're going down ways in which we think people haven't really explored this before, and as you're seeing, hopefully by just some of the rough descriptions, we're going very visceral. I know we're having Phil, who's been overseeing some of this stuff, has had a hard time creating any kind of advertising for this game that doesn't get banned.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of places that do any kind of advertising where you can push out any campaigns and generate awareness. They don't like any kind of violence of any kind. So
is that more recent?
It's more recent, and it's really, the definition I'm seeing come back is anything that doesn't generate positive community vibes is probably hateful.
Oh my god!
Probably hateful.
Yeah, like a character holding a weapon apparently is bad enough in a video game. But you'll notice if you start looking at like videos on YouTube and Facebook where they're actually like marketing videos, rather stuff that gets pushed to you rather than, you'll notice that they're all heavily edited in ways that you're only really seeing like story sequences, or you're not seeing the actual blows in combat really hit. They're just very well cut.
Yeah.
So that seems to be the way it's going right now, which is it's a little frustrating, but we're going to figure out other ways of getting the word out still, and obviously we'll still do traditional ads too, as we want to scale this up and get more awareness on it. But
could you do your ad exactly as you would know, just as hardcore as you wanted it, but just put censor bars over everything?
Oh man, no,
just tongue in cheek about it.
I just did a regular gameplay cut first, and that was not cool. We replaced all the blood and everything with white sparks instead, and that was still a little too extreme.
Too risky, man.
So
we don't do that here.
We'll
strange
we'll
times.
Characters for unicorns and bears and things later on.
The funniest thing I remember, so we had no idea, right? We're doing this all for the first time. We're having a really fun time, and we led with the vampire holding up the severed head.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Bad idea.
Yeah.
I don't. My take on. I would think that audiences would like it. Like there's a huge demand for that old school.
We love it. I don't know. That kind of horror for me is the best kind of horror.
Yeah.
And certainly you don't want to be just gratuitous, but
Right.
a vampire holding up a severed head is nothing new to me.
Right.
I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times, and it's, if anything, I would say almost canon within the whole mythology of vampires. But I think people are really trying to understand this medium, and it's really frightening a lot of people. The free flow of information is hard, but at the end of the day, we're just going to make the game we want to make it, and hopefully through word of mouth and talking to people like yourself, Jack, we'll get this word out there and just be like, this is the game we're doing. It's what we like, and we're going in a direction that we're going to go. And we're, certainly, we're having, it's challenging getting out there because of some of our content, but we think it's good content and worthwhile content. And for those people into Gothic horror or the undead, it should be right up their alley.
Yeah. And of course, just caveat here, we just, so it's clear, we're only targeting ads at people who are over 21 as well, right? So we're not aiming them at kids or anything like that.
Man, when I was 12 and into this stuff, I must have been like 10, or when I played the first Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, I was wee, and I just immediately fell in love. And God, that might have been one of the earlier things that set me down the path of loving Gothic horror and the undead and vampire. There may have been things before Blood Omen, but I don't remember them specifically.
It's almost really, the world goes in circles, and I guess I'm getting somewhat old now, but back when we were creating Legacy of Kain, we were basically told that vampires are a bad idea. They're passé. No one wants to play a vampire. And on top of that, that because it was a North American RPG on a console, they were back then only made in Japan. To do an RPG or an action adventure like Legacy of Kain was, Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, with this mature content where it's really the completely inverse of Zelda, where you're not out to save the princess at all. And that just wasn't done back then. And now we're finding things that I wouldn't even consider, like these are just natural things we're doing, like eating body parts for a ghoul. These are what ghouls do. Mm-hmm. So, so if we're really going to do this right, whether it is accepted by the mainstream, we don't know. And I guess in a sense, to be accepted by the mainstream is something that's almost an antithesis of what we're doing. So we certainly want a big audience, and we think we can get a big audience, but we want to, this is truly a dark game. And it's going to have some really great stuff in it. Nothing that I would find particularly offensive, but you're playing the undead. You're dead. So it's pretty grim. It's grim. It's a dark fantasy.
But it's fun. I don't get being weirded out by that. Like, that's just really cool, being being a ghoul and munching on bodies, or being a vampire and all these things. And I know there are people out there that love it. I know there are people that have told me, oh, let me know when this interview is up, because they're really into that stuff and previous works and such. And I'm undoubtedly biased, but I anticipate it having a big following.
Well, we hope so. Certainly, we certainly are very confident it's going to be different, and we do really want to sort of shake up the genre. And the multiplayer games out there, they're all generally gravitate towards one or two areas. What we're trying to do with our foray into the multiplayer space is the narrative and the world building, and doing something that is unexplored territory, which I think we're doing. We did have lucky enough to have the experience of creating Legacy of Kain. So drawing on that experience is just a huge wealth of knowledge that we can just automatically pull from and say, well, this is how we did it then. That's great. Let's look at how we would do it for all these other classes. And, there would make no sense to make, say, a Wraith or a Lich just like a vampire. That's not cool. So how would they play differently, and why would you want to be a different type of undead other than a vampire, which everyone knows?
And this is so cool to people who love the undead, because we're like, people who love the undead are just like getting what scraps they can get in games. Like, oh my god, you can be undead, and it's just like a setting that changes some mechanic in the game. But in this one, you can be like all the different kinds. Here's one of the questions. Here's one of the things I'm wondering about. In the demo, in the trailer, you were fighting humans. You're going to be fighting all kinds of different things in the actual game, not just humans. You're going to fight against the other houses, etc. Presumably, they're going to have all kinds of different behaviors. Like I noticed in the trailer, the humans as a whole were just like undead and would just swarm in mass. And I wondered about different types. And I know that because there were different types in, say, Blood Omen. And just for the record, for people who've been listening and wondering, this is probably on people's minds. Deadhaus Sonata does not take place in the Blood Omen universe or the Eternal Darkness universe. It's inspired by them. It has one of the creators, but it's its own universe. But I wonder about civilians and other types of entities within human cities, say, because there were in Blood Omen, you could interact with certain ones when you were in disguise, for example, or you could feed on them, or things like that. Anything like that in terms of non-military in Deadhaus? Yeah.
Yep.
Different ways that different classes can interact with them depending on their class. A vampire would be able to feed on the blood of someone sleeping, maybe, or a banshee, or one of the other ones might be able to get into their dreams, something like that. Yeah.
So the amount of narrative, I would say, greenfield that we have to work with is incredible, and it really hasn't been explored that much. So the answer is absolutely yes. It was really fun doing it in Legacy of Kain, and you have things like Bram Stoker's Dracula, where you really get the perspective of Dracula. But from our perspective in Deadhaus, we're going to show the perspectives of many of the different types of undead. And there's certainly the military aspects where you're fighting, in some cases, hordes of enemies, and other very powerful classes that you may come up against. But there has to be a narrative element to it as well. Without the narrative, I don't think Legacy of Kain would have been what it was. So we're really trying to emphasize that narrative is very, very important to us. And the real $1 million questions around that area is, how do we do that in the multiplayer space? How do we do that with procedurally generated game? Does that mean how do we do it with an audience? And Phil is absolutely right. We're not going to control, and it's impossible to control where this narrative is going to go. In some cases, we definitely have plans, but part of the plan is to give the community agency. And that is a big deal. It's something that we're really looking forward to, and I think is hopefully something gamers will embrace.
I wonder also about, anything that's asymmetrical is compelling to me, especially in terms of, obviously in combat, it very much is, but also in terms of non-combat. I wonder about things like, there's a town, you're going in, are there parts that one of the dead would be repelled, that wouldn't necessarily repel one of the other types of dead? Because if you read the lores, there are different rules for different things will repel a vampire than would repel a wraith, for instance. And are there going to be things like that in towns where, okay, then your buddy, I can't go in, there's salt over there, so you got to go, and that's cool.
Yeah, so you as an example, like really just quickly, ghouls are generally not affected by anything like that. They're just ghouls. And whereas a vampire going over running water, sunlight affects them very
that's
negatively.
Old school.
Yeah, so there's going to be all of these different things for each of these different. There is no. The idea is that we want them all to be different, and there's advantages and disadvantages of each different type of class.
That's really cool. I love that you are honoring the lore, especially over running water. I haven't heard that one in a long time. That's really cool for vampires. How is sunlight going to work?
Traditionally, sunlight, despite what people have seen in a lot of movies, the most traditional lore of a vampire is a vampire can go out in the daylight, but they're weakened.
Yeah.
They're just they're more powerful at night,
Right.
but they don't burn up and die.
Right. That's right.
And that's basically the approach we're going to take with Deadhaus. We're going very old school with a lot of the concepts and the research.
So is there a day-night cycle or certain stages? Okay, day-night cycle. So the vampire, that's interesting. The vampire has to balance a lot of things. He has to balance his blood level. He has to be really, that's very compelling. Are there abilities that because you've talked a lot about synchronized abilities, combo abilities, and that's something I think is really cool. Upwards of 6, I believe you said, because 6 is the maximum capacity of a team. Is that right?
Oh, that's just for now. We can make that much larger theoretically. We're picking 6 because that's generally what a good cohesive team would be. You can play the game single just by yourself as well, of course, but you can have up to 5 other friends playing with you.
Someone can help the vampire by making it dark?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, there's all kinds of it's really I find that doing things that are what I would say compelling for gamers generally comes down to hard work. It's not that anyone's necessarily there's always a natural talent towards it, but I think there's no escaping just working hard, doing the research, and trying to create something that people will look at it and go, here's our rule set. This is a very consistent rule set. So as an example, saying there's going to be day and night cycles, that's going to be a core thing. And if you look at Legacy of Kain as an example, we had not only did we have day and night cycles, but we had full lunar cycles. So I don't know if you were aware or saw that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so if you that was some of the really crazy secrets, where at midnight on a full moon, certain doors would open, and you would have to read the rune. You'd have to be able to translate the Futhark runes, and it would say on a full moon, at midnight, this door will open, literally, and there'd be whole areas that you could explore. And so the whole idea of having these celestial bodies also plays into, if you look at Lovecraftian horror, it's cosmic horror, and it's based on the cosmos. So we're absolutely going to be thinking about this game on the cosmic level. And there are certainly, you always start small, and we've got certain areas, but we've got worlds, realms, universes. It's a wide open country where we're going with this.
So if I kind of wonder about a story element here. You talked about the trinary system and it being different per house and swapping essential for sanity because the undead aren't affected by sanity altering effects, which makes me wonder, are they exempt in a way, the only house perhaps exempt in a way from the influence of the outer gods? Everyone else is alive.
Yeah, certainly being dead has its advantages. And that is going to be the elements, as you are focusing in on, are going to be some of the key story drivers of what is going to dictate the narrative of the game. And when you look at, I'm a huge fan of anthropology. And when you look at how different groups do different things, when you look at, say, the Roman Empire versus I don't know, the Egyptians. There were certain things within the cultures that made them dominant for the time frame, and certain things that they did and didn't do that made them phase in and out in power. And there were times where certainly Egypt and Rome exchanged victories as far as dominance goes, but generally Rome was the most dominant. And what are those differences and what made them separate? Those kind of details are really what come out naturally in world history, where I think putting in those kind of details into the world of Deadhaus Sonata is what's going to make the game interesting. So you're absolutely right. Being undead has its advantages. It also has its disadvantages. So, and there's going to be, like, as an example, Giga House. Being big has its advantages. But it also has its disadvantages. And there's going to be different
You famine, I would imagine, depending on where you are. You got to eat a lot if you're enormous, and there's only so much food you can get out of a square foot area.
Yeah, and you look at some undead as an example, like the ghoul and the vampire have to eat. Some don't. Some undead don't care.
That's true, yeah. But right? Is Deadhaus the best house because everyone technically can join Deadhaus? Because if you die, you can become undead.
Correct.
No matter what you are.
That is a very interesting philosophical question that we want to address in the game. There are other houses. Certainly, I would say without question, Deadhaus is not the most powerful.
I see you opening your mouth down there.
Dying is not the only prerequisite of joining Deadhaus.
Yeah, that's true.
And what does dying really mean? What does that really mean?
Yeah.
What happens? And these are big philosophical questions that I think will resonate with just people in general. That's a question that no one has an answer to. So we're going to try to create a fantasy world, where we explain, maybe on a metaphysical or a quantum mechanics level, on how some of these things can work.
I do feel compelled to know. I know they're not doing so hot about the humans because they feel like the underdogs, and yet you mentioned all these ancient civilizations and Rome and Egypt, and certainly Rome was at least partly successful because of the Legion. But any society that manages to hang on and survive in some aspect, surrounded by so many terrible forces, has to have something going for it. It has to have some kind of.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That was a very knowing yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, we've been thinking about this for a long time. Story arcs, and we can say these things with confidence because we have a at least a strong foundation of where the game is going to take things on a narrative level, and that is just sort of the side effects of the way that traditionally I have done things. Story is just as important as gameplay, and quite frankly, making them intertwined is very, very important. So as an example, when you look at Eternal Darkness, the whole idea of replaying the game with a different ancient is really talking about a parallel universe, and that really truly is really Mantarok manipulating different planes to take out all of his enemies at once. And that is basically having gameplay, replaying the level, explaining what a different reality would be like if you made a different choice. And all of those three realities together are something that this elder god can see and manipulate, which he does. And you are truly the pawn of Mantarok in Eternal Darkness. Spoiler for those who haven't played it, but that's kind of the idea. And that's gameplay.
I've heard people interpret him as benevolent entity, and I'm like, I don't think so.
Yeah, I would not say that, but at the end of the day, he's certainly very, very powerful. Even in his death, he destroyed very powerful rivals.
So what is it? What is it that unless it's a secret, that has the Empire of Man hanging on? Is it they have a patron deity?
Spoilers?
Yeah.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
I said unless it's a secret, and then Dennis shook his head like, no, it's not a secret.
No, it's probably something we shouldn't say at this point, but so suffice to say, I guess what I find very encouraging is that you're interested in finding out what is going on in this world. And by looking at certainly the demo that we showed, there was no narrative in that whatsoever. And we do, as we start to roll these things out, we've got some pretty crazy things planned. And I think anyone who's interested in the things that I have done traditionally, all of that spirit is being rolled into Deadhaus, and everyone at Apocalypse has embraced that fully and contributed to ways that, quite frankly, could not have been done before. And I'm really excited about our team makeup right now and the way we're doing things. And it's pretty exciting. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I feel good.
Very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing stuff for a long time now, and like this is the most excited I've been of all of the projects, right? Seeing what this can be and how it's coming together, and the passion of the people involved in it is pretty damn inspiring, and which is why I'm so big on keeping the spoilers, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that.
So, well,
it's pretty... said though, right? It's like it's great that you've got that interest, and I think that certain things need to be kept under wraps because the finding out of that stuff is more sweet than the immediacy.
That's true. Yes, that's true. Although I want it now, but my interest comes from obviously the undead, but also what you said about narrative being as equally important to you as gameplay. Incredibly rare mindset within game devs as a whole. I talked to a lot of them, especially recently, a lot of them. I can't tell you how many times recently I've heard, nobody cares about story. Who cares about that? That's just story. And I could tell that.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah. I could tell that was kind of the mentality even when I was younger and just playing games. Story. I was always pausing the game and like, to anyone nearby who would listen, no, this is wrong and what about this part? But your game's obviously very heavy story focused. So I think anyone who cares about story is going to be compelled and interested when they see people taking time and putting effort. Any game that does it, even in the weirdest of ways, like the Dark Souls series, they have a really weird way of delivering their story, but it is there. And people get obsessed and dig down deeper. And they're really there's I feel like there's a desire for it, a market for it that people, I don't know what it is about the industry that it doesn't seem aware of it, or it just downplays it, or what.
That's a very good question, and it comes down to I think this historically holds for every new type of medium, and I've as you can probably gleaned by now, mediums are one of them. A huge Marshall McLuhan fan, where the medium is the message. And when you look at each new medium, it's generally dominated by the things that it can do differently. There are some very huge creators that don't even think the video game industry is a creative industry. They think it's a technical industry, which is also that is historically consistent with film and radio when they all these new technologies started rolling out. So it's not. So here's the thing: the thing that makes the thing that makes video games stand out as a new medium is gameplay, and that's the whole idea of giving gamers agency, where you can actually affect what you're seeing. In a movie, it's completely linear. Even if you look at something like Pulp Fiction, where the story is not necessarily, the timeline's not linear, but you're watching it, you're seeing it exactly as the director wants to see it. Now, when you play a video game, the video game director can't force you to go left or right. You do whatever you're going to do. And that's why in some story games, people are like, man, he killed Lord British. He shouldn't be able to kill Lord British. And, just kind of things like that with RPGs. I remember that was a big deal back in the day with Ultima Online when people would kill Lord British because he was supposed to be invincible. And it was meant to be... oh, yeah. Well, okay. Ultima Online. So it's a few years old. But so the thing that generally, which I think is a misnomer about all media in general, people look at gameplay as the new thing, therefore the most important thing. And if you look at moving pictures as an example, this is an example I really like to talk about a lot, and that I use as why I think that's not correct, why gameplay is important, but not the most important thing. So with moving pictures, it was all about the motion. And at first, when film started becoming popular, it were the people who could do all the special effects, cut the film in certain ways. The best would be the most dominant. And then suddenly story came in, and then stars started becoming dominant, and people started going to see movies for the story. And before then, movies would literally just loop in a circle. You come down, sit down till it looped, or as long as you wanted, then you would leave. There were no show times per se. There was no narrative. And now film has come down to, it's not always the special effects that will make a movie better. It's not always the story that will make a movie better. It could be a bunch of all these different things. And right now, I think the video game industry is so young, people still generally think that gameplay is naturally the thing that makes it unique. Therefore, it's the thing they should concentrate on the most. I think that's just a natural thing. And I think that if you look at video games, there are many things. And I don't think that narrative is the most important thing either. I did a talk back in 1996, right after I finished Legacy of Kain, where I started really thinking about this a lot. And it comes down to what's an engaging experience. You can create a game that's based on music. And then in that case, it's music is your most dominant aspect. You can make a game look incredibly beautiful. You know, say something like Quake or Doom that people had not even seen before, or in that case, it's the technology that's mind-blowing. In other cases, it could be the story, like some of our games. In other cases, it could be something like Candy Crush, where it's purely the gameplay. Or you look at games by Miyamoto-san, where the gameplay is definitely centrifugal. And you have all of these different aspects, but I think in general, it's how do you create an engaging experience? And some of the tools of our trade is telling interesting stories and creating interesting worlds that people want to explore. I think that has some lasting value, but others don't have to agree. But I just think there's many ways. How do we engage an audience? If we can engage people, we're doing our job. If you lose track of time while you're playing a game, then you've done the right thing. And so that's my theory on why people don't think story is that important. And I think in this case, it's whatever tools of the trade that you want to use to create a compelling experience, whether it's the technology, whether it's the artwork, whether it's the audio, whether it's the narrative, whether it's the gameplay. Any of those areas are a combination of all of the above. However you do it is really where the rubber meets the road, in my opinion. It's all about engagement.
Completely agree. I mean, there's different mechanisms within video games. Like you take Tetris, for example, you're not going to play it for the engaging story, but it invokes a mechanism of a natural engagement state that you want to organize things. And then the more pressure that you have put on you as you're organizing things, the more you kick in certain chemicals in your body and you want to play more and faster. And so that's one way of doing it. And I think, the approach that we're taking is much more the idea of, what's great about a book, what's great about a movie, what's great about playing in your own yard and making up stories and smashing all of that together with the interactivity being the engagement. So part of it's the suspense of the questions that you may have about where the story's going. And I think the devil is really in the details in managing that. And I think that's where, for example, our team is super passionate about the details. Like myself and Denis is a good example. We're both obsessed with ancient history and all sorts of cultures and civilizations and the ways that they interact and those kinds of things. They work their ways in, and it's about building a consistency within the world and within the cultures within the world, and then making sure that the details are right. And then people like us, and I'm sure you're in that bracket, Jack. We get enjoyment out of finding that one little detail that is kind of like an Easter egg, right? That works as it should do, and most people won't notice it, and it's in that world, and you can interact with it, and it makes sense in context with everything. And there's certain pieces like that, and I think gameplay is certainly a mechanism that we're super into. Hence releasing gameplay first, right? So it's that combination of the interaction plus the anticipation of where is the story going to go, and probably the theories you're creating in your head as you're playing it, trying to figure out where is this going and what are the motivations of the characters and the narrative and how does this all interplay. So that's why I love the team that we're working with and the game that we're working on, is because I think it really has the ability to pull all that stuff together in a very compelling way.
Well, I can't wait for it, and I'm sure there's nothing remotely close to a release date in your minds.
Well, we have our alpha on the website, which is around this time, a little earlier. I think it's second quarter 2020 is going to be our first scheduled closed alpha. Correct? Am I correct on that?
You are correct.
Yeah.
So it's on the website. And we have a lot of stuff on the website. We even dropped some new content on the website by popular request. We dropped a little snippet of content called Seven Suns in Twilight. I don't know if you've seen that, Jack.
I've not.
Yeah,
I'll check it out.
It's under Deadhaus Sonata, and let us know what you think.
I will. Yeah, we'll link the website in the description of the video.
Cool.
Well, I think we covered a really good bit.
Cool.
Yeah.
A lot of cool questions and a lot of things I'm sure a lot of people have not heard before.
Well, I hope not. We're trying to do some good stuff. By your reaction, it seems genuinely different, which is good. That's what we're shooting for.
Mm-hmm.
Innovative and different.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In the right ways, in the undead ways.
Cool.
It's about time.
Awesome.
Well, yeah, I think we'll go ahead and cut this one here.
Awesome.
And thank you all for those who watched this long.
Thank you.
And be sure to leave in the comments what parts you found particularly interesting and things you'd be interested in seeing next time. And I don't have an outro closing line. I've never thought of one.
Well, we appreciate the time, and if anyone out there is interested in learning more about the game, certainly visit our website. Apocalypse333.com. We've got a Discord server. We've got a YouTube channel that we're starting to populate with Deadhaus stuff, and we're going to launch eventually. We have a Twitch channel up, but we're not doing much with it yet. And we've got some big announcements right around the corner too, with some community stuff that I think people are going to be pleasantly intrigued by some of the things we're doing. So, and I look forward to those reactions, and yours specifically, Jack. So we really appreciate the time. Thanks for, showing so much interest in Deadhaus Sonata, and we hope we can meet your expectations. And in the end, we work for gamers, so anything we can do to make the gaming experience better that's our main number one goal.
I've got a good closing line. Deadhaus Sonata, and you can play as a tank, as a nuker, summoner, battlefield controller, and a chef.
Yeah, correct.
Yes. I like that.
Yep, absolutely.
Writing it down.